Hey, Peter.
Hello, Martin.
You're all right.
Yeah, I'm okay, but tell you the truth, I'm a little bit confused.
What about?
This curriculum development business, okay?
Interesting you should say that
Mm,
because I've got a couple of slides here that might help shape your thinking.
okay, let's have a
Do
look.
you want to have a look? I've
Mm,
called it the Excellence Gateway Framework. There we go.
yeah, this is exactly it. The difference between framework and model.
Right. You need to get to grips with that
Yeah.
because if you don't, then you're at sixes and sevens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I took a quick look into your head
Yeah.
earlier. Frankly, I didn't like what I saw, but
Mm,
one thing was very positive. You know, this image that you had there right at the front of your brain of what a framework was.
yeah.
This scaffolding, connecting different ideas and ways of looking at things into a bigger picture.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
And then I searched for model,
Yeah.
and rather less accurate, I thought.
Really?
Yeah. But does this pop up quite a lot, this kind of image?
When I'm looking in the mirror, basically.
Ah, right. I did wonder. Anyway, just to clarify, a framework is a way of pulling together lots of different models or theories. Okay?
Yeah.
So I can have a theory about, let's say, the evolution of humankind. And that theory might be that the planet was populated by aliens at some distant point in the past, which competes with another theory, which is creationism,
Okay.
which competes with another theory, which is evolution. And all of those theories come under a framework which pulls all those together for the existence of human beings on the planet Earth. So my framework pulls that together, and it's the same in curriculum design. For example, you've already looked at, haven't you, the Atherton framework?
Oh, the cross.
The cross thing.
Oh, yeah, okay, with the quadrants.
That's right, the quadrants,
right, okay.
which is quite a convenient way of looking at different models or theories of curriculum design, curriculum development. What's interesting about that, though, is that although it's really convenient and logical, and I really like it, I think it works really well. Actually, what you find in most textbooks are different models. And the Excellence Gateway have done a really good job of pulling those different models together into a framework for curriculum design.
I've seen that. And actually, I want to go on.
Can I show you where it is?
Yep.
So you can go to this website, and not only does it give you a little bit of work to do, to see how much you can remember about the different models that we're going to look at in a moment, but also gives you some nice links and resources that would be perfect if, for example, you were writing an essay on curriculum development.
Right.
Perfect, actually.
And I think this is on one of the tiles of the blend space as well for the CDIP.
Very good indeed. So that would be absolutely perfect, wouldn't it? So try and eradicate from your brain.
It's difficult.
Any reflections of yourself in the mirror, and think about models as being just one way of promoting or suggesting a way a curriculum should be developed, or perhaps a way of analysing existing curricula. So, for example, I might say this theory is about what's already happening out there, or I might say this is a theory about how we should be doing things. And some models are more of a proposition. Some models are more analytical. And it's worth thinking about which direction the original theorists were coming from when they put together their works.
Should we talk about them?
Let's go ahead. Should we start with the first one then?
Yes. Now this one, as far as I know, this one is all about product model, about objectives, isn't it? Is that right?
Yes.
And the main guy, the main man keeps coming up is Ralph Tyler. And he basically came up with this theory in 1949, so quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it didn't mean that people weren't using objectives before that.
Yeah.
But what it has done is it's had a sort of incremental rolling snowball effect of gradually gaining momentum and gaining in size, until actually, if we look back over the last 60 years and consider where we are now against where we were before, we can see that Tyler's model, the objectives model, or the product model as it's called, of curriculum development, has had a profound impact. No more so, I think, than in further education, actually. Above and beyond what happens in schools or universities, in further education, the product model is king or queen. And it really has a huge resonance. Let me just give you one example. When you're observed, when your manager comes to observe you, the expectation is that you have your objectives up and that you share them with your student.
Yeah,
it's a given, isn't it?
And you reach those objectives by the end of the lesson.
I mean, you would be as unlikely to forget to do that as you would to turn up wearing trousers. Although I could imagine, if that really is your reflection, that coming shirtless might be
occasionally happens.
Yeah, might be something that would be welcome. But just think about that for a moment. You know, we're terrified of not doing that tick box. In fact, a lot of observation forms, including the one that we use on the Cert Ed, says, have the objectives been shared with the students? It's a given. And yet it's just one of only 4 that we're talking about today, models of a way that we can design a class within a broader curriculum.
Yeah.
So it's quite incredible how much power that's had.
So would I be right in saying that if you were designing a curriculum under the product model, that you maybe would start with the objectives and then work backwards?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, your objectives don't necessarily have to be for a session. Your objectives might be the whole course, and then thematic through the different units, and then drilled right the way down to the individual components that are the lessons that we deliver. And each stage, it's your objectives that define the whole structure of everything. And they really shape the delivery, because very often there is only one way of achieving that objective, particularly if they have skills or tasks embedded into them. And teachers often find it difficult to differentiate between ability objectives or knowledge objectives and task objectives. And that's because sometimes they're inseparable. So if I was doing a literacy class, then write a letter to your bank is both task and the skill. Writing a letter is implicit in there, and it's really tough sometimes for teachers to separate themselves from that, particularly if they're new. They come in, they see all these objectives that they've got to achieve in their curricula, often defined by the examining body or the awarding body, and they do what they can to ensure that the students are meeting those objectives, and they get into a way of thinking, and then it just perpetuates and it carries on, and they feel like they have no control whatsoever over the design of the curriculum, and only a limited amount of control over the content of each session.
And where's the student in all this? I mean,
well, the student is essentially a passive recipient,
right?
The objectives are the objectives,
right?
And they have to be achieved,
right?
Whether it's in a vocational NVQ kind of context, or even in an academic or functional skills type of context, the objectives have to be achieved, and the students have to get through those things and tick them off in order to reach the qualification goal at the end of it. And that is the structure of a lot of courses in FE, product driven. And it doesn't matter who the student is, by and large, because everybody has to achieve the same objectives.
So to a certain extent, the student takes a back seat.
Very much a back seat. But when we talk about the process model, we might be able to see how we've tried to overcome that inadequacy or that deficit. But we'll come to that in a little bit.
What about, the next one, the content model? Now, to me, content suggests that it's more focused on and involved in, what is within the curriculum, as opposed to what comes out at the end of it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, absolutely. And it's quite interesting to look at this, because for a long time, this was the dominant model. It's dominated education for much longer, actually, than the objectives model.
Right.
Universities still, in a lot of areas, not all, but in a lot of areas, have this as the predominant focus. It's about learning stuff, learning facts, learning knowledge. And that knowledge is filled into the brain by the expert. The teacher is focal, the teacher is expert, and the content is defined either by the institution, the people putting the courses together, such as it is at university level, or by the state, as it is in pretty much all of our schools, particularly at GCSE and A-levels standard, and even more particularly since the 1988 Education Act, which defined that thing called the national curriculum. And that national curriculum is a content-driven curriculum because the Thatcher government determined so much of that content. Committees with education experts granted, but nevertheless, what students needed to know in history, what they needed to know in maths, in English, in geography, the facts, the core content that they needed to know, aspects of grammar. And that was all set out. And all of a sudden, we had much reduced flexibility and diversity in the curriculum and much more rigidity. And that was why there was so much conflict starting then and continuing now between teachers and the state, because teachers had ripped away at one fell swoop masses of the autonomy that they previously had to shape and design the curriculum around the individual needs of their students, the setting that they were in, you know, whether they had large groups of migrants or what socioeconomic groups they had, the interests, the needs, the specificity of that location, to the point where everyone was doing pretty much the same thing, whether you were in Bognor Regis or Aberdeen.
Mm. But it's still connected with the product model, isn't it?
It can be, yes, because you can define knowledge elements, units, in terms of objectives. So students will be able to explain who was the king in 1850. You know, students will be able to list the kings and queens of England from 1701 to the present day. You know, so you can use the objectives model to inform the content model. But I think that the value system that sits behind it comes first, actually, and you can do it in other ways as well. So it could be a list of topics and facts about that topic, but without much distinguishing between the various levels of knowledge and those kinds of things, and particularly the application.
Right. And again, would you say that the student in this model takes more of a back seat?
Yeah, it's a passive model. These are the facts, you have to learn them. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you're interested in, doesn't matter what your background is. You have to learn this stuff in order to succeed at the next stage, which is the accreditation or the examination.
And Hurst is the main man for this, is he? Yeah,
I think his is perhaps less of a proposal, because it was a very long and well-established system, than Tyler's 1949 quite seminal work. His is more analytical. It's a framework for analysing those knowledge-based curricula. And we can use it to critique it as well, because we can use it as a way of saying at least what the inadequacies are and the problems that might arise from looking at that as a shape.
Okay. The process model. Now, again, from the title, to me, that would suggest that one is more interested in the way things are being learned, or why something is being learned, the point of it. It brings to mind people like Vygotsky, scaffolding.
Very, very good. Yes, absolutely. Scaffolding is a key word here.
Right.
When you think about scaffolding, you think about the notion of constructivism. And it's about constructing knowledge with the expert scaffolder, which is the teacher, facilitator, sometimes in this model, who knows how much to put in place to enable you to climb up. And as you grow in confidence, as you climb that scaffold, your confidence grows, scaffolding is removed, and you become more solid and confident in your own right. And then move on to the next section where you might have to rebuild the scaffolding around that student. And there's a key distinction here already in the way that we're talking, isn't there? And can you identify what that might be?
Suddenly the student comes to the forefront.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the student is focal, whereas in the product model, it's the objectives that are everything. What is it that you want to achieve, be they vocational skills or knowledge-based or whatever? Less so affective stuff, emotional stuff, be a better person, because they're really difficult to measure. But nevertheless, that can still come under the product model. Less than the is starting to think about the individual, what they need, how they need to get to the next stage, what that next stage might be, variation within that, flexibility, changes of emphasis, and as you rightly point out, application.
Okay. But you could have a mixture, could you? I mean, this could be mixed with, the objectives or product model.
It very often is. It very often is. But what we're talking about here is emphasis. We're talking about the values that sit behind it. So if the values that sit behind someone's curriculum development is a constructivist view, a Vygotskian constructivist view that wants to put the student at the center of the learning process, then they might use objectives to shape the lesson delivery, the syllabus, the week by week scheme, I should say. But actually, the values that sit behind that have shaped it. And you would say that this is much more drawn from the process model,
right,
if you were analysing it, I think. And it's important to define where the emphasis lies and where that comes from. Sometimes it happens because that's all we're exposed to. Teachers who I started teaching in 1992. So that's only 4 years after the implementation of national curriculum. When I started teaching, you could go into a classroom and say, right, we're going to do a module on sociology. You had generic criteria for success. So I could do whatever the heck I wanted as a foundation for people who would go and study it properly at university. So I had a local history module. I had an oral history module. We used to do some stuff on the Thames Police Court and how Jack the Ripper's victims and the Birmingham Six had been processed there. Really exciting local stuff. But that doesn't happen anymore because there aren't units, outcomes, objectives. So I couldn't do process now unless I was particularly influential at a local level.
Is the process model, if we're talking about learning theories, is that connected to the cognitivist approach?
I think so, yeah. It is all about making those links, understanding that, that we need to make connections, that we can't learn things in isolation. We learn things by rote, as you might be forced to do in the content model predominantly, but also in aspects of the process model. That's very behavioristic.
Right.
You learn things by rote and you don't know what they mean. You just know them, but it doesn't have any meaning beyond that. If you wanted to apply a different model of the curriculum, you might want to think about reinforcement and revisiting things, going back to spiral curriculum. Yeah.
So that's what that means. It means going back on yourself, as it were, sort of repeating and.
Now, repetition and reinforcement are a key part of behaviorism, of course, but actually it's more than that. It's tapping into educational psychological theories of the way that the mind and memory work, and this idea that being exposed to something once is inadequate.
Not enough.
You need to keep coming back to it, therefore minimizing the need to revise and cram and learn facts just before the exam at the end of the course so that you can pass it and then forget all about it and go and do something else with that certificate.
Right.
So it's looking at the deficits of the sort of the gold standard qualifications in our country, the O level that became the GCSE and the A levels as well.
Starting to make a lot more sense to me.
Good.
A situational model. Again, the title implies to me situation. So in other words, is this more connected with being on site, vocational, actually learning the skills that you need for a vocational?
It is in part.
Right.
That's the easiest way of looking at it.
Right.
Let's say that I want to learn how to be a plumber.
Yeah.
Now, I can read a book about plumbing and I can watch videos about plumbing. But most people would agree that I need to get my hands dirty to find out whether I've got a talent for it and what the issues are when it comes to actually soldering two pieces of pipe work together and, what have you. So what do? They set up technical colleges in the 19th century.
Yeah.
As a response to the Industrial Revolution. I used to work in Bradford, which is, celebrated its 150th anniversary while I was there. This is quite incredible how far back some of these technical colleges go. And the idea was you would bring a whole bunch of young men, primarily in those days, but of course young women now. But still we have a sort of schism in the gender-related roles. Very few women in construction, very few men in beauty therapy, for example. But, you take those young people, put them into a workshop that's kind of designed to reflect the real world, and you get them to join two bits of pipe together,
right,
or to cut the hair on a plastic dummy head, so you don't risk blowing up a building with your acetylene torch. You don't risk stabbing someone in the eye with a pair of scissors. Sounds like a perfect solution, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what this model would argue is that it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough, because an apprentice will be doing exactly those same things, but with the reality of the risks and the variations in an environment also layered on top. Because most plumbers don't get to join two pieces of pipe together standing upright at the comfort of a desk.
Yeah, I see.
It's done in an enclosed space with fire hazards. And let's face it, my sister trained to be a hairdresser, and she had to learn how to use a cutthroat razor. And I thought it was very clever what they did. They had to shave a balloon.
I've heard of this, yeah.
And if it bursts,
Really,
you've cut your client.
Mm.
And I think that's great, but it's still not someone's face, because after all, a balloon will make you jump, and you'll think, "Oh, I better do it better next time." But it's still not someone's face. If you shave somebody and you see the blood, then then that's the reality, and that's what this is saying, that there are grades of it. So that in terms of the situation, particularly for vocational qualifications, it's really important to get that right and make the most of it. But there is another side to it as well, and that is the situation in terms of the group and the group motivations and the individuals within that group. So, and it can apply to academic areas as well. So, for example, if I was studying, say, the history of art, I can study it out of a book. I can look at the projections that my teacher puts up on the screen. I can go to art galleries. I could go to a workshop or a studio and see an artist applying paint in different ways with a palette knife or a brush. But what's important there in all of those things is the situation of the individual. Am I training to be an auctioneer? So I need a knowledge of art. Am I training or hoping to be an artist myself? Two completely, massively different motivations. And those motivations are accommodated in the situational model to an extent in the process model, and not at all in the product and content models. However, what happens in the situational model, if applied with equanimity and fairness to all of the individuals involved, is that you can have just these completely distorted ways of approaching the subject, and it can be very difficult to measure achievement, measure success. I mean, this is why a lot of art teachers or photography teachers really struggle to grade their students' work,
right?
Because they're grading them on the product model,
right? Yeah.
When they actually want to grade them from the situational context of their gut and their reaction to that person as an individual. What this person has done is truly emotional. It might just be a few stick men on a piece of paper. Technically, it doesn't tick in any of these boxes, but emotionally, it's got everything. And it's the affective side that the situational model is trying to embrace a little bit more than some of the other models there as well.
That is really starting to make a lot more sense. And actually, it makes me think about what we read, the Atherton model with Cross, going back to that. There are connections. I can see parallels to the Atherton framework.
And I knew you were going to say that. So give me an example.
So if we remember the Atherton framework, the Atherton Cross, we've got vocational up at the top there, then going to 3 o'clock, you've got developmental, constructive. Then 6 o'clock is academic, and the 9 o'clock is mastery. And mastery meant not.
Keep going.
It meant the basic.
Yes, the foundations, the fundamentals,
right.
getting the core right, not being the all-seeing, all-powerful expert. No. It implies that when you first come across the term, but mastery is just getting the fundamentals, the understanding. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, the mastery elements are the two bottom bits, of the triangle.
Yeah. So if we had to connect the two, then would we say, for example, going back to, say, Tyler and the product model, objectives model, would that go under the mastery vocational quadrant?
Yes, it would, definitely. Elements of it would fit in further south as well towards academic, but actually that's where it sits most comfortably, because the parallels are really clear. So well done for identifying
right
that.
And we have to understand that they don't have to be solely in one quadrant. Is that right?
Yeah, particularly if you pick a course and analyze it, you'll find that there are elements from different areas, and that's when it's useful to start considering people's values, or institutional values, or the values of the state.
Martin, thank you very much indeed.
Peter, it's been a pleasure. You can go and look in the mirror again now.
Thanks.